If I told you about a man, a genius, genuinely, who built products that changed the world, products so good that people wept at product launches, that wrote poetry in silicon and glass. But this same man, the same genius, would tell a colleague their work was garbage in front of the whole team, would park in disabled bays, would deny being the father of his own child for 2 years, would fire people in elevators. Would you follow him?
I've been sitting with that question all week because the honest answer is complicated.
Right. And that complication, that tension between the genius and the cruelty, between what he built and what he cost the people who built it with him, that is the whole book. Walter Isaacson spent 2 years interviewing Steve Jobs, over 100 conversations. And what he produced is not a hagiography. It is not a takedown. It is a mirror held up to a man and held up to us.
Welcome to Discourse, where we have a friendly chat about important stuff. I'm Chloe.
And I'm Andre. And fair warning, we're going to disagree a little today. Not with each other about the facts, we both read the book, but about what to do with those facts. And I think that disagreement is actually the most valuable thing we can give you. Because if you walk away from this episode having simply decided Jobs was a hero or a villain, you missed the whole point.
Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson, published 2011, one of the best-selling biographies ever written. Let's get into it. To understand Jobs, everything about him, you have to start with a single scene. He is a child, sitting on his front lawn, and a neighbor girl asks him, "Didn't your real parents want you?" He runs inside crying, and his adoptive parents sit him down, look him straight in the eye and tell him, "We specifically chose you." They did not say, "We love you just the same." They said, "We picked you."
And Isaacson argues that single moment, that reframe, everything runs through it, because Jobs internalized both things simultaneously, the wound and the specialness, the abandonment and the chosenness. And out of that paradox, he built a psychological architecture where he was the one who decided what was real, what was possible, what other people were capable of. Nobody else got to set those limits.
Which is the origin of what colleagues called the reality distortion field. Isaacson describes it as a blend of charismatic rhetoric, an indomitable will, and a complete refusal to accept that any constraint was truly fixed. The story that illustrates it most vividly is Breakout, the Atari video game. Jobs told Steve Wozniak they had 4 days to design the circuit. Wozniak, one of the finest engineers of his generation, said it was impossible. 4 days was not enough time.
And then Wozniak did it in 4 days. Not because the physics changed, not because the engineering changed, because Jobs refused to accept the ceiling. And somehow, that refusal, it transferred, and Wozniak found something in himself he didn't know was there.
Now, this is the first place I want us to be honest about the cost of that field, because Wozniak later discovered Jobs had been paid far more for the work than he was told, and Jobs pocketed the difference. The same force that inspired genius in others also rationalized treating those same people as instruments. The reality distortion field did not distinguish what it bent. It bent everything, including the truth.
Including the truth. And we're going to come back to that. Okay, so here is where the book gives us something genuinely useful that isn't complicated by the man's character. Because whatever you think of Steve Jobs, the person, what he believed about craft is something I think everybody in here needs to hear.
His father, Paul, who by all accounts was a warm, humble man, quite unlike his son, was a carpenter and a mechanic, and he taught Jobs this principle, early. A great craftsman does not use cheap wood on the back of a chest of drawers simply because nobody will see it, because he will know it is there, and it will haunt his sleep.
And Jobs carried that his whole life. When the original Macintosh was being built, the circuit board, the inside of the machine, the part no consumer would ever see, Jobs rejected the initial design, not because it didn't work, it worked fine, because the lines of the memory chips were not straight enough.
Which, to any normal engineer, is an absurd note to receive.
right? They're inside a sealed box. Nobody's going to see them. But Jobs said, real artists sign their work. And when the final Macintosh went to production, the signatures of every single member of the design team were engraved inside the plastic casing, where no one would ever see them, except the people who made it.
And I find that genuinely moving, actually, because it is an act of integrity in the deepest sense of the word. Not integrity as in morality, integrity as in wholeness. The inside matches the outside. The invisible work receives the same attention as the visible. There is no version of the product that Jobs was willing to let exist anywhere that was less than what he believed it should be.
And that philosophy, not the cruelty, not the ego, that philosophy is what separates a product people love from a product people merely use. Think about the work you do, any work. Is there a back of the drawer you've been cutting corners on, a part of the thing you're building, a relationship, a project, a version of yourself, where you've been using plywood because you figured nobody would see it?
Because you see it, and it will haunt your sleep. Jobs had what Isaacson describes as a dogmatic, almost Zen-like obsession with simplicity, and his definition of simplicity is important because it is not what most people mean when they say the word.
Most people think simple means easy to make, like you strip things down because you didn't have the resources or the skill to make them complex. But Jobs meant the opposite. He said to be truly simple, you have to go really deep. You have to understand the underlying problem so thoroughly that the complexity has nowhere to hide. Simple is the result of exhaustive mastery, not the shortcut around it.
The iPod. Every song within 3 clicks. That was the target. Not 3-ish, not 3 on a good day, 3. And if an interface took 4 clicks, he would dismantle it until they found the 1 click they could remove. Engineers who worked with him describe it as relentless, borderline unbearable, and the iPod sold 400 million units.
And when he came back to Apple in 1997, the company had dozens of products all over the place. Laptops and desktops and printers and servers and PDAs, a different product line for seemingly every day of the week. He walked to the whiteboard, drew a 2x2 grid, consumer versus pro, desktop versus portable, 4 boxes. He said, we make one great product for each box. Everything else, gone.
And people in that room, senior engineers, product managers, people who had built their careers on those product lines, were horrified. And 18 months later, Apple turned its first profit in years.
Because focus is not about what you choose to do. It's about having the courage to eliminate the things that are good in service of the things that are exceptional. And that courage is rare because good things feel valuable. Saying no to something good, something that works, that people like, that generates revenue, that takes a kind of ruthlessness that most of us don't have or don't want to have.
Which brings us back to the part of Jobs that troubles me.
Here we go.
Because the same ruthlessness that killed bad products also killed people. Not literally, but their dignity, their confidence, their sense of worth. There are engineers quoted in this book who describe Jobs reducing them to tears in public, dismissing years of work as the worst thing I've ever seen, claiming credit for ideas he hadn't had. And I find myself unable to simply extract the lesson and discard the man, because the lesson and the man came in the same package.
That's fair. That's real. We just talked about Jobs' obsession with cutting the non-essential, saying no to the good stuff so the great stuff can breathe. Here's the one thing I'm going to ask you to say yes to today. Subscribe to Discourse. Hit the bell. One small commitment. Every week, we bring you a conversation that actually goes somewhere. No filler, no algorithm bait, just 2 people and a book and the truth as best we can find it. That's the deal. Back to Jobs.
Efficient. Jobs would have approved of the brevity, at least.
At least. Let's keep going.
1985. Apple's board sides with the CEO Jobs himself hired, John Sculley, and removes Jobs from the company he founded. He is 30 years old. He has been publicly humiliated. He is, by any measure, destroyed.
And then he describes it, years later, as the best thing that ever happened to him.
He said the heaviness of success was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again. And in the 12 years he spent away from Apple, he founded Next, which developed the operating system that would eventually become the foundation of Mac OS X. He bought a small graphics company from George Lucas for $5 million and turned it into Pixar, the company that made Toy Story, that built an entirely new form of cinema.
He didn't get fired and go quiet. He got fired and ran toward the next thing and the next thing without the weight of who he was supposed to be at Apple anymore, without the pressure of defending his identity. Just, what can I build next?
And then he comes back to Apple in 1997 and turns it into the most valuable company in the world. There is a version of that story where getting fired is the end, and then there is the real version, where it was the beginning.
Isaacson connects this to the cancer. 2003, Jobs is diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And this is one of his real failings, and Isaacson does not gloss over it. He refused treatment for 9 months. He tried diets, juice cleanses, alternative remedies. 9 months that doctors later said likely cost him his life.
And this is where the reality distortion field stopped being a superpower and became a liability. The same force that made engineers exceed their limits made him believe he could will away a tumor.
But when he finally accepted the diagnosis, when he stopped distorting that particular reality, what emerged was something genuinely profound. His Stanford commencement speech, 2005. He told the graduates, remembering that you are going to die is the best tool to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You are already naked. There is no reason not to follow your heart.
Death as clarity. Every false option stripped away, every pretense removed. Just what do you actually believe in? What are you actually here for? Because time is not a renewable resource, and knowing that, truly knowing it, changes how you spend it.
You are already naked. There is no reason not to follow your heart. Okay, the last thing I want to get into, because I think it's the most applicable idea in the whole book, is Jobs' thesis about where real value gets created in the modern world.
The intersection of the humanities and the sciences. Jobs was, almost uniquely for a tech founder of his era, deeply shaped by the arts, by calligraphy, which he studied as an audit at Reed College after dropping out, by Bob Dylan, by the Zen Buddhism he practiced seriously for years, by his belief that technology without soul, without the liberal arts in its DNA, was just engineering. And engineering alone, he thought, could never move people.
He used to say, the people who are only good at technology stay in garages. It takes someone who understands people, who understands beauty, story, desire, what makes something feel right, to take what the engineer built and make the world want it.
And this is why the original Macintosh had beautiful typefaces. It is why every pixel of every Apple interface was treated as a human experience rather than a technical specification. Jobs would say, we're not just making a product, we are making a contribution to the pool of human experience. Which is, even if you find him difficult, a genuinely magnificent way to think about work.
And the organizations he pointed to as failures, Sony, Microsoft, he didn't think they failed because of bad engineering. They failed because the people making the decisions were only engineers or only business people. Nobody in the room who could say, this feels wrong. Nobody who had been trained to trust that feeling.
And his final obsession, the thing Isaacson returns to again and again in the last chapters, was building a lasting company. Not a hit product, not a brilliant decade, a company that would outlive him, that would still be capable of the same quality of thought and making even without him in the room. Whether he succeeded is a question the next 20 years will answer.
So next 20 years will answer. All right, let's land. I want to say something directly because this episode has been different from the others. We've covered books about habits and flow and dopamine and emotions and self-image. And those books were about principles, clean, extractable principles. This book is about a person. And a person ain't clean. And a person ain't fully extractable. And I don't think we should pretend otherwise.
What I take from Steve Jobs is not a blueprint to imitate. It is a set of questions to carry. Am I doing the invisible work with the same care I do the visible? Am I being honest about what I need to eliminate so the things I'm keeping can actually be great? Am I bringing both sides of myself to what I build, the technical and the human? And what would I build if I truly knew my time was limited?
And the question I want to leave you with, the uncomfortable one, is this. Jobs produced extraordinary things, and he produced extraordinary harm, sometimes to the same people in the same moment. How much of that can we separate? Should we separate it? Or is there something in the not separating and holding both that teaches us something more honest about genius and about people and about what it actually costs to build something that changes the world? Drop your answer in the comments. Seriously, we want that conversation.
Because there are no easy answers in this book, and we think, Isaacson thinks, Jobs himself thought, that the most important questions rarely have easy answers. What we can do is keep asking them, clearly, honestly, with our full attention, which, in a way, is the most Jobsian thing we could possibly say.
That's a good line, Chloe.
I have my moments.
Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson. Read it. And don't let yourself off the hook while you do. I'm Andre.
I'm Chloe.
And this is Discourse.
Stay honest, stay complex, and we'll see you next time.